Chapter 3319, Chapter 393, Black Flame Strength. Chapter 3319, Chapter 393, Black Flame Strength. Chapter 393, Black Flame Strength. What happened? All those Tier 4 experts are gone, just like that. When the players fighting against the innumerable void creatures on the void sea saw the army of several 100,000 Tier 4 experts plunging into the sea, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded. "Tell me I'm dreaming, Aunt," Franz mumbled to Favre when he saw the Paimon conglomerate's Tier 4 experts dropping like flies. Even with his status, this was the first time he had seen several 100,000 Tier 4 experts getting killed in the blink of an eye. The shock Franz experienced was further intensified when he saw Shifeng suddenly emerging from the floating island and quietly watching the army of Tier 4 experts plunging into the ocean like a heavenly god. Normally, a Tier 4 army of such size could take on even Tier 6 experts with the help of a magic barrier. Yet, now, the entire army had gotten obliterated. Everything had happened so quickly that Franz didn't even know what had happened. Fear. Unprecedented fear sprouted in the depths of Franz's heart. It should be known that the Tier 4 experts in the Paimon conglomerate's army weren't a bunch of random nobodies. They would be regarded as mid-level mainstays if put in an ordinary hegemonic power. Many among them were even experts superior to him. If even these experts were erased in the blink of an eye, it went without saying he would do no better than them if put in their shoes. Divine might. With her wealth of experience, Favre quickly understood the cause of the Tier 4 experts' fall, and this realization caused her expression to grow serious. That's a divine might surpassing Tier 6 god. A divine might that has surpassed Tier 6 gods. The fear in Franz's eyes intensified when he heard his aunt's words. Doesn't that mean, yes, that's an ancient god's divine might? Favre said in a grave tone. Although I don't know what Black Flame has done, he has indeed managed to borrow the strength of an ancient god. Ancient gods were existences beyond Tier 6 gods. In the minds of the average player, ancient gods had long vanished from the greater god's domain, and their existences were akin to myths that only existed in books. However, the various hegemonic powers knew that wasn't the case at all. Not only were ancient gods still present in the greater god's domain, but they were also unavoidable existences for those seeking to ascend to the greater god's domain's apex. Meanwhile, the various hegemonic powers and conglomerates had one simple instruction for their members to do should they come across an ancient god. Run. In the eyes of ancient gods, all existences beneath Tier 6 were no different than ants they could effortlessly crush if they were in a bad mood. Moreover, it wouldn't be a simple death. Players beneath Tier 5 would be at an incredibly high risk of suffering soul annihilation, while even Tier 5 players would have a real chance of suffering soul annihilation. Hence, ancient gods were existences even more terrifying than natural disasters. Is this an ancient god's strength? Outside the floating island, Saint Arm's face turned pale as he looked at the hundreds of thousands of corpses floating on the void sea beneath him. Ancient gods were rarely seen in the greater god's domain, and there was very little information about them, even in the Paimon conglomerate's database. The only thing the Paimon conglomerate was certain of was that ancient gods were existences to be feared. However, after witnessing the instant annihilation of several 100,000 Tier 4 experts and the petrification of over 1,000 Tier 5 experts, Saint Arm felt that ancient gods were even more terrifying than rumored. Lunatic. That Black Flame must be a lunatic. He's trying to drag all of us down with him. Dira cursed and gnashed his teeth when he saw Shifeng emerging from the floating island. He didn't think Shifeng would be so crazy as to deliberately provoke an ancient god to have them accompany him in death. Quick, everyone, get rid of him. Only if he dies can we appease the ancient god's wrath. An ancient god's wrath was devastating, and all non-Tier 6 players would have a chance of suffering soul annihilation. At this time, Dira wasn't the only person to have figured out the situation. White Owl and the others also realized Shifeng's plan. Immediately, they activated their respective berserk skills without hesitation, increasing their basic attributes to resist the powerful divine might. However, even White Owl, one of the Paimon conglomerate's 10 great paragons, could only exhibit 1/3 of her usual mobility under the effects of the ancient god's divine might. She couldn't use any powerful combat techniques in this state, so she could only rely on Tier 5 skills to kill Shifeng. Only, before White Owl could use a Tier 5 skill, a 20-meter-tall giant clad in a white robe suddenly appeared before Shifeng. Then, the axe of light the giant wielded transformed into thousands of blinding beams that attacked Shifeng from all directions. The beams vaporized everything in their path. Even the superior mythic-ranked void sea dragons that got struck were instantly reduced to ashes. By the time White Owl had reacted to the situation, over 100 Tier 5 experts caught within the ancient god's attack radius had already gotten killed, their existences getting erased so thoroughly that they didn't even drop any of their equipment on death. At the end of the ancient god's attack, Shifeng was the only person still alive within the giant's attack radius. He blocked it. White Owl's eyes widened in shock. Not even she had managed to react to the ancient god's attack. Yet, Shifeng had not only reacted to it, but he had even blocked it in time. Although Shifeng had lost over half of his HP from blocking the attack and the two swords he wielded were trembling violently, he could practically be considered unharmed compared to the Tier 5 experts who were instantly killed. White Owl wasn't the only person feeling dazed at this moment. Spectating from a distance, Death Omen and Thousand Scars were also stunned when they saw Shifeng successfully blocking the ancient god's attack. However, before everyone could come back to their senses, the white-robed ancient god reformed their axe of light and swung it, executing an attack that exuded power several times greater than before. It's over. All of us are doomed. Death Omen fell into despair when she sensed the mana gathering around the axe of light. By her estimates, the ancient god's following attack could most likely annihilate everything within a 10,000-yard radius at the very least. And if Tier 4 players like them were to die from this attack, they would most definitely suffer soul annihilation. It seems this is my current limit, Shifeng thought as he looked at the trembling winter of eternal night. Then, after taking a deep breath, he looked to the white-robed ancient god and said, "But don't go thinking you can get rid of me so easily." After saying so, Shifeng raised the shadow incinerator he wielded in his left hand at the ancient god. Incinerator's phantasm. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3320, Chapter 394, God vs. God. Chapter 3320, Chapter 394, God vs. God. Chapter 394, God vs. God. Damn it. How did things turn out like this? When Saint Arm sensed the terrifying amount of mana gathered in the ancient god's axe of light, a bitter look appeared on his face. At this point, even a fool could tell that the ancient god's attack was strong enough to erase all existences caught within its radius. If players were struck by the attack, losing a few levels and items would be the least of their worries. They might never be able to log back into God's domain. When White Owl saw the white-robed ancient god's axe of light, she let out a resigned sigh and said, "It seems it's over." If she was going up against a Tier 6 god's attack, she was confident she could keep herself from suffering soul annihilation at the very least. However, ancient gods were unlike the average Tier 6 god. Every ancient god had reached the extremes of a certain field. Even among Tier 6 players, few could even survive against an ancient god's all-out attack. So, it was even more impossible for a Tier 5 player like herself to survive it. However, when the ancient god's axe of light began its descent, and everyone could feel death approaching them, a 20-meter-tall man suddenly appeared out of thin air in front of Shifeng. The man carried two exquisite long swords around his waist, and he wore a silver cloak with a hood that covered his head. Although the cloak made the man's face indistinct, it was still vaguely possible to see the man's sharp and seasoned eyes. As soon as this mysterious man appeared, everyone's hearts inexplicably shuddered. NPC. An NPC? Is it another god? No, he's not a god. He's a player. When everyone saw the giant swordsman, particularly the player symbol displayed above the swordsman's head, they couldn't help but be confused. Firstly, they were confused as to how a player could have such a huge body. Secondly, they were confused by the frightening divine might the mysterious swordsman radiated. The swordsman's divine might not only felt as powerful as the ancient god's divine might, but it even felt vaguely superior. Why would such a Tier 6 player appear in this place? White Owl was similarly surprised to see the mysterious swordsman. Could he be related to Zero Wing? Others might not know how a player managed to gain such a gigantic body, but White Owl did. In reality, it wasn't anything strange for a Tier 6 player to have a 20-meter tall body. After all, players were responsible for constructing their own Tier 6 divine body. Most Tier 6 players might still have a standard human body when they initially got promoted to Tier 6, but so long as they managed to come into contact with the core secrets surrounding Tier 6, they could even create a 200-meter tall body, let alone a 20-meter tall body. Only, such Tier 6 players would normally only appear in the 12 sanctuaries. It wasn't often one would come across such a Tier 6 player in realms outside the 12 sanctuaries. So, rather than the mysterious swordsman's size, White Owl was more surprised by how the mysterious swordsman would appear in a miniature ancient world's world passage. Before White Owl could make sense of the situation, the mysterious swordsman could be seen unsheathing one of his long swords. The long sword had a crimson body covered in black patterns, and black electric arcs constantly circulated the weapon's blade. As soon as the crimson long sword was unsheathed, the surrounding void started to repeatedly self-destruct and self-repair. It was evident that even the void was incapable of withstanding the longsword's power. Vanish. After unsheathing the crimson sword, the mysterious swordsman indifferently said only one word before swinging his long sword at the white-robed ancient god's terrifying axe of light. Immediately, a dark tide made up of black lightning arcs swarmed the descending brilliance. Boom. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the sky above the void sea, followed by a powerful shockwave that sent all players within vision range of the battlefield flying thousands of yards backward. At the same time, space-time cracks also formed across the void sea, annihilating any void sea serpents and void sea dragons next to them. After the explosion, the players present on the void sea couldn't help but gape in shock as they looked in the direction of the floating island. It's gone. That terrifying attack got erased. It should be known that the white-robed ancient god's attack had roused all mana within a 10,000-yard radius. Yet, the mysterious swordsman had erased all of this mana. He actually blocked an ancient god's all-out attack. Is he really just a player? Saint Arm, who was struggling to keep himself from falling out of the sky, was greatly shocked as he watched the white-robed ancient god trading blows with the mysterious swordsman in the distance. He doubted that even the Paimon conglomerate's 3 overlords could defend against the white-robed ancient god's all-out attack. Yet, the mysterious Tier 6 swordsman had accomplished it with seemingly little effort. In addition, what was even more unbelievable was that the mysterious swordsman was currently trading blows with the white-robed ancient god without losing any ground. It was also evident that the ancient god wasn't holding back against the mysterious swordsman, as every collision between the axe of light and crimson longsword would generate a shockwave that could be clearly felt from thousands of yards away. As for the other players, their jaws dropped when they saw the exchange between the mysterious swordsman and the white-robed ancient god. It was especially so for newcomer players who had only recently come into contact with God's domain. Is this what battles between Tier 6 God-ranked players and Tier 6 gods look like? This was the first time they had witnessed such a devastating confrontation since they entered God's domain until now. The area within a 3,000-yard radius of the mysterious swordsman and white-robed ancient god had become off-limits to all life as space-time rifts could be seen forming everywhere. Moreover, a beam of light or a dark thunderbolt would also emerge from this forbidden zone and strike a random location within a 10,000-yard radius from time to time, the impact of these attacks instantly vaporizing numerous void creatures and players. Even bronze warships, which should be capable of withstanding one Tier 6 attack, were instantly reduced to ashes when struck. If these two mighty beings were to continue fighting, their battle could even devastate an entire continent. Compared to the newcomer players, though, the various hegemonic powers experts and the Paimon conglomerates experts were in greater shock. He can hold his ground against an ancient god. Who is this person? White Owl was greatly confused as she watched the mysterious Tier 6 swordsman fight. Very few Tier 6 players could fight an ancient god to a standstill in the greater god's domain, and every one of these players was an apex existence in the 12 sanctuaries. However, as far as White Owl could tell, the mysterious swordsman wasn't one of these apex existences. While White Owl was wondering about the mysterious swordsman's identity, The person in question and the white-robed ancient god used their respective ultimate moves. On the ancient god's side, the white-robed ancient god summoned a star of light that illuminated the entire void sea, the star dozens of times larger than the floating island. If it struck the void sea, the resulting impact would obliterate all existences within a radius of several 100,000 yards. On the other side, the mysterious swordsman raised his long sword and released a world-ending thunderbolt that pierced the descending star. Boom! Following an explosion that echoed throughout the entire world passage, everyone's vision went dark. Immediately afterward, the sound of a system notification entered everyone's ears. System announcement: a regional system update has begun. All players within the affected region will be forcibly logged off. The update will last approximately 2 natural days. Chapter 394, God vs. God. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3321, Chapter 395, Ripple. Chapter 3321, Chapter 395, Ripple. Chapter 395, Ripple. Greater God's Domain, Starlight Realm, Sea of Giants. The Sea of Giants was one of the few seas in the Starlight Realm. Not only did it connect over a dozen kingdoms and empires, but it was also linked to the Endless Void. 4 ordinary and upper-ranking hegemonic powers looking to conduct cross-realm trade, they would typically send their flying ships to the Sea of Giants. But during the past few days, the various hegemonic powers were forced to abide by many restrictions in the Sea of Giants. As an example, one flying ship was currently stopped in front of a gigantic door and put under inspection by multiple Tier 4 players. Meanwhile, aboard this flying ship, a level 195, Tier 6 berserker who looked like a middle-aged man in his 50s wore a disgruntled expression as he looked at the level 140, Tier 4 players inspecting the ship. Damn the Paimon conglomerate. If it wants to cordon off the world gate, just do it. Why does it have to involve us players looking to enter the endless void? Keep your voice down. The Divine Seal Legion's people are going to hear you, a level 192, Tier 6 male cleric said in a hushed voice. If they decide to attack us, none of us will be leaving this place alive. TSK, I'm just venting my frustrations a little, the Tier 6 berserker said. When he heard the mention of the Divine Seal Legion, though, he promptly chose to speak softly. We're only passing by. Is there a need to put us through such a strict inspection? There are so many ships trying to cross this place, yet they're taking their sweet time with the inspections. We're going to lose a lot of money if we're late for our delivery. What can we do? The Tier 6 cleric said, similarly displeased by the Tier 4 players inspecting their ship. Under normal circumstances, he could have annihilated these Tier 4 players with a wave of his hand. Now, though, he dared not do so. The Divine Seal Legion has already issued a statement that all players moving within 100,000 yards of the World Gate must undergo a strict inspection by Payman's members or get treated as a hostile force. There were several routes in the Sea of Giants that led to the Endless Void, but the safest route required them to pass by the newly appeared World Gate. As for the other routes, they would be at risk of either becoming lost in the fog of the Sea of Giants' depths or getting annihilated by a swarm of sea monsters. But that person called Black Flame sure is courageous. I can't believe there'd be someone who would dare to kill Dira, the Tier 6 berserker said as he looked at the gigantic door in the distance. Then, with a sympathetic look, he continued, but with the Divine Seal Legion's Vice Commander Wind Seal guarding this place, neither Black Flame nor the members of the power behind him will be able to get past this place alive. They'll probably be trapped in that miniature world for the rest of their lives. Wind Seal was a vice commander of the Divine Seal Legion, and few among Tier 6 could match him. Even though the Berserker and Cleric were similarly Tier 6 players, they wouldn't last more than a few moves against Wind Seal. Needless to say, a bunch of Tier 4 and Tier 5 players would have an even lower chance of surviving. The World Passage was the only reliable method to travel between worlds. In a situation where the World Passage was blocked, it would be utterly impossible for players to escape from the miniature ancient world. Meanwhile, once the Paimon conglomerate's army entered the miniature ancient world, it was only a matter of time before the conglomerate eliminated Black Flame and Zero Wing. While the Tier 6 Berserker and Tier 6 Cleric were chatting, a loud explosion suddenly came from the distant door. Immediately afterward, the area within a 500-kilometer radius of the World Gate transformed into a space-time rift, and all creatures caught within the rift were annihilated. An ambush. The Berserker and Cleric fell into a daze as they looked at the space-time rift in the distance. Space-time rifts were incredibly dangerous in God's domain. Even Tier 6 players would suffer heavy damage if they accidentally came into contact with one. Meanwhile, a massive space-time rift 1,000 kilometers wide had just opened up in front of them. Fortunately, the space-time rift did not exist for long as the greater God's domain quickly mended it. When the rift disappeared, though, the players who were undergoing the Paimon conglomerate's inspection couldn't help but gasp. Gone. All 100 Tier 6 experts guarding the World Gate had disappeared. Even the Divine Seal Legion's Vice Commander Wind Seal had vanished. What's going on? Everyone was shocked as they looked at the empty region the space-time rift had left behind. At this moment, even the World Gate had disappeared, let alone the Divine Seal Legion. The area was so empty that it didn't look like a World Gate had ever existed in this place. Meanwhile, after a short silence, the various players present promptly relayed this situation to their respective powers. The disappearance of a World Gate was no big deal. At most, everyone would feel a little surprised. However, the death of the Divine Seal Legion's 100 Tier 6 experts and Vice Commander Windseal was an unbelievably shocking piece of news. The Divine Seal Legion might not have many members, but every one of them was a Tier 6 expert. Moreover, they were all equipped with weapons and equipment that could make even executives of hegemonic powers envious. At the same time, they were also an important force for the Paimon conglomerate to maintain stability within its territory. Now that the Divine Seal Legion had lost not only 100 of such Tier 6 experts but also Vice Commander Windseal, it would definitely have a huge impact on the Paimon conglomerate's capabilities. In no time, news of the Paimon conglomerate's loss spread across the entire Starlight Realm, shocking both players and powers. Even the Starlight Realm's several conglomerates were taken aback by the news, and they promptly dispatched people to find out what had happened at the Sea of Giants. At the same time, they also wanted to know if this incident was related to Black Flame. Of course, even though the various powers were investigating whether this incident was related to Black Flame, everyone in the Starlight Realm more or less knew the answer. The news of the Divine Seal Saint sending his subordinates to annihilate a miniature world had long spread across the entire Starlight Realm. Now that the army he dispatched to kill Black Flame was suddenly annihilated, anybody who said Black Flame was unrelated to this matter would be lying. However, once the various powers started their investigations, they quickly learned of shocking news. Of the players the Paimon conglomerate had sent into the miniature ancient world, over 99% of them had their qualifications to log into God's domain permanently deprived. As for the rest, although they still had the qualifications to log into God's domain, the system forced them to stay offline for 2 days. Although the various powers had tried to get more information out of these players, they failed to come up with much information since the Paimon conglomerate had issued a gag order. They only managed to find out 2 pieces of information. Firstly, Zero Wing, the guild behind Black Flame, possessed an extraordinary background as it was revealed that the guild possessed an expert capable of suppressing White Owl, one of the Paimon conglomerate's 10 great paragons. The expert in question had even fended off the first wave of attack launched by the Paimon conglomerate's army. Secondly, an ancient god had appeared in the World Passage. For a time, the various powers theorized that Zero Wing should have something to do with the ancient god's appearance. It was also through this method that Zero Wing managed to cause the Paimon conglomerate to suffer heavy losses. Meanwhile, the Paimon conglomerate's silence on the matter only served to cause everyone to suspect that Zero Wing shared close ties with the ancient god in question. While the Starlight Realm's players and powers were in an uproar, a short-haired girl wearing a white shirt anxiously entered the top-floor conference room of a 3,000-tall skyscraper, the magnificent structure sitting in the middle of a floating steel city in the greater world. If Shifeng was in this conference room, he would find that this valiant and extraordinary-looking girl looked somewhat similar to White Owl. Only, compared to the White Owl in God's domain, the girl in the white shirt looked more mature and graceful. She was also close to reaching the 3-star mental strength Grandmaster standard already. Currently, there were around a dozen people seated in the conference room. After the girl in the white shirt entered the room, cold sweat rolled down her forehead as she was subjected to the mental pressure exerted by these people. White Owl, you should know why we called you here, right? Are you certain that man was evenly matched with an ancient god? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3322, Chapter 396, Zero Wings Members. Chapter 3322, Chapter 396, Zero Wings Members. Chapter 396, Zero Wings Members. Star Lake City, God's Domain Association. Inside a room on the 490th floor, following the sound of a mechanical airlock opening, the door of the virtual gaming cabin in the room slowly opened. Immediately afterward, the cabin's alarm sounded, reminding the user that the cabin's supply of life potion had already reached critically low levels and was in need of replenishment. When Shifeng stepped out of the gaming cabin, a feeling of overwhelming exhaustion promptly enveloped him, and he wanted nothing more than to crash into his bed and fall asleep. How close! That ancient god nearly got me, Shifeng thought, inwardly celebrating as he grabbed a bottle of life potion from the fridge and drank it. If not for the shadow incinerator letting me perfectly recreate my past self. Otherwise, even escaping wouldn't have been possible. Shifeng was honestly surprised that his fight with the white-robed ancient god had triggered a space-time tide in the world passage, which, in turn, led to everyone being forcibly logged out of the game by the system. Personally, though, Shifeng welcomed this forced logout as this meant that his character would disappear from God's domain, and the ancient god would have left after realizing that he was nowhere to be found. He also wouldn't have to fight for his life again once he logged back into the game. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng felt much better about his situation. Although the event this time was perilous, the Shadow Incinerator's performance far exceeded his expectations. The Incinerator's phantasm skill was especially incredible. Not only did it allow him to create an existence that was 2 tiers above him, but it also allowed him to perfectly recreate the weapons and equipment. If he hadn't been able to recreate the weapons and equipment he used during his previous life, even if he had managed to recreate his Tier 6 character, the ancient god could have still beaten him black and blue. Of course, the incredible skill also came with an incredible price, its activation causing his level to fall from 155 to 135. With the God of Time's curse plaguing him, it would take him a considerable amount of time to recover these 20 levels. No wonder the Crimson Wing could slaughter ancient gods left and right. If the Shadow Incinerator can already exhibit such strength with 4 seals placed on it, it wouldn't be completely impossible for a Tier 6 player wielding the unsealed version to slay ancient gods. When Shifeng thought about the 4 seals placed on the Shadow Incinerator, he couldn't help but grow a little excited. Undoing the seals did not require him to collect precious materials. The 4 seals were merely divine might seals, so all he needed to do was attack these seals with mental objects. The only problem was that these 4 divine might seals were much stronger than the one the Shadow Incinerator had placed on him previously. Not only did these 4 divine might seals place incredibly complex barriers on the Shadow Incinerator, but they also had significantly tougher mental nodes. In his current state, he would have no hope of breaking these 4 divine might seals. However, if he made use of the ancient dragon's power, he could try to break the first complicated divine might seal after he officially reached Tier 5. The first seal wasn't particularly hard to analyze. With his abilities as a great Grandmaster magician, he could locate the mental nodes given enough time. So long as he could lift the first seal, the Shadow Incinerator should become strong enough to let him stand his ground even against Tier 6 players. Subsequently, several hours passed in the blink of an eye. While Shifeng was still recuperating from his mentally weakened state, he received a message through his quantum watch, the message stating that the Star Lake Legion's selection had officially concluded. At the same time, the names of the top 1,000 participants were also announced. When the selection list was announced, many people in Star Lake City couldn't help but grow confused. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Shifeng remained in first place. On the other hand, Gentle Snow, who was previously ranked 10th in the selection, had fallen to 17th. However, Shifeng wasn't surprised by this outcome. Feng had long told Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul that so long as they could get into the selection's top 100, they could become official participants in the Star Lake Legion. Scoring any higher in the selection would only let him attract more attention from the Star Lake Legion's higher-ups. The benefits they received from the Legion wouldn't see any changes. Evidently, Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul no longer bothered to test themselves after their first test. Instead, they had chosen to focus all their attention on improving themselves. Not to mention, Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul were currently undertaking the Void Saint trial, so that was even more reason for them not to let themselves get distracted. The Void Saint class was special. Even at his peak during his previous life, Feng would have no choice but to flee if he came across a hostile Void Saint in the void. Otherwise, it would only be a matter of time before he got worn out and killed. Without a divine weapon, it was simply impossible for non-Void Saints to kill a Void Saint of the same tier in the void. But isn't the Star Lake Legion a little too hasty? The selection has just ended, yet it is already looking to test all qualified participants without giving anyone time to rest. Feng didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw the Star Lake Legion's invitation notice. Being able to join the Star Lake Legion so soon was naturally good news for him. After all, he would only be provided free accommodation in the God's Domain Association for 1 month, and he doubted he could secure himself a room in the association after this 1 month passed. He also needed to pay contribution points if he wanted to continue living in the city. Aside from the first month after he entered the greater world, he would be banished from the city if he failed to pay enough contribution points to Star Lake City in subsequent months. This was a rule that even the Star Lake Legion's commander would have to follow. However, for people who weren't mental strength grandmasters, earning contribution points in a city was incredibly challenging. Many people would fail to meet their monthly quota even if they worked 24 hours a day every day. This was because every city could only accommodate a limited population. Yet, countless people were arriving at the greater world from various parallel worlds every day. As a result, every city could only supply a limited number of contribution points every day, and those seeking to stay in a city would have to fight for these points. To make matters worse, most of a city's contribution points would be in the hands of the city's powerful families and corporations. If a person did not join one of these powerful families or corporations, they would have much greater difficulty earning contribution points. However, it was a different story once a person became an official member of the Star Lake Legion. Official participants of the Legion would have plenty of ways to earn contribution points. The Legion would even award its official participants a fixed amount of contribution points every month, and participants only needed to earn a small amount of contribution points to pay their monthly residence contribution. After Feng finished reading the Star Lake Legion's message, he washed up himself and dragged his tired body to the Star Lake Training Center. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3323, Chapter 397, Newcomers and Veterans. Chapter 3323, Chapter 397, Newcomers and Veterans. Chapter 397, Newcomers and Veterans. Star Lake City, Star Lake Training Center. When Feng arrived outside the training center by car, the entrance was already crowded with people. Among these people, some were friends and families of those who had passed the selection, while some were the Star Lake Legion's reserve participants and members of the Star Lake City's various powerful families. Feng didn't think much of this scene and simply squeezed through the crowd. Every city legion would only recruit members once a year, and the day of the recruitment would be the liveliest day of the year for a city. It would also be a day when many people's fates would change. Apart from people who had passed a city legion's selection, the City Legion's reserve participants and members of the city's various powerful families would also be paying close attention to this annual recruitment. One could even say that the latter group was much more concerned over the City Legion's annual recruitment. It was true that those who managed to get into a City Legion selection's top 1,000 would be guaranteed a place in the City Legion. However, not all members in the City Legion would be of equal position. Upon joining a City Legion, a person would, first and foremost, be put into one of two main groups, official participants and reserve participants. Of the 1,000 people who passed the selection, The top 100 would be made into official participants, while the remaining 900 would be made into reserve participants. Subsequently, the City Legion was split into 3 tiers of official participants, and each tier would have numerous battle groups. Every battle group would receive different treatment from the City Legion based on their importance. Ace battle groups received the best treatment in the Legion, which showed in the contribution points they received each month. Even without doing anything, an Ace battle group member could pay their monthly residence contribution and have excess points that they could use to exchange for the city's limited resources. The city's limited resources were items highly coveted by the various corporations. An example of these limited resources would be the Stardew. Just 1 drop of Stardew could drastically improve the user's nervous response system and let the user recover up to 50 years of their youth. If a person consumed 1 drop of Stardew every year, their mental strength would naturally rise from the 1-star mental strength master standard to the 1-star mental strength grandmaster standard within 3 to 5 years. Even after a person became a mental strength grandmaster, consuming Stardew could still speed up the improvement of their mental strength, letting them reach the 3-star mental strength grandmaster standard much more quickly. This would, in turn, give them a better chance at going beyond the grandmaster realm. In addition, Stardew could let mental strength grandmasters better preserve their youthfulness. Typically, a mental strength grandmaster would have little to no chance of going beyond the grandmaster realm past the age of 100. However, if a mental strength grandmaster regularly consumed Stardew, they could extend this time limit to 150 years old. Unfortunately, because the various conglomerates monopolized the technology to manufacture Stardew, the various cities needed to go to great lengths just to exchange for a small amount. So, most cities could only afford to allocate their supply of Stardew to the members of their City Legion. Moreover, it would be at the price of 1 million contribution points per drop of Stardew. It should be known that the average civilian living in Star Lake City's suburbs only needed to pay a monthly residence contribution of 1,000 points. Even those living in the city center only needed to pay 3,000 points a month. Meanwhile, the average official participant in the Star Lake Legion would only receive 2,000 contribution points a month if they didn't participate in any city battles. If they completed commissions for the City Legion, they would receive about 100 contribution points per commission. So, it was nigh impossible for the average official participant to exchange a drop of Stardew. Only by joining an Ace battle group and participating in every city battle available could a person have any hopes of exchanging a drop of Stardew when they reached the retirement age of 50. Therefore, it was of great importance that one joined an Ace battle group when joining the Star Lake Legion. In the Star Lake Legion, each battle group could only have up to 50 members. Specifically, each battle group could have up to 20 regulars and 30 replacements. The regulars of each battle group would usually be the ones participating in city battles, and the replacements would take the place of the regulars if the regulars happened to be out of commission. As only those under the age of 50 could be in a City Legion, there would be people retiring from the Star Lake Legion every year. This meant empty slots would be available in the various battle groups every year. While the minimum requirement to join a battle group was to be an official participant, reserve participants could try for one of these vacant slots. After all, the Star Lake Legion's selection would only bring in 100 new official participants each year. Yet, the Star Lake Legion had nearly 200 battle groups spread across the 3 tiers. Thus, so long as a reserve participant could pass the basic test for official participants, they would be promoted into an official participant and qualify to join a battle group. However, things were a little different for Ace battle groups. Unlike normal battle groups led by 2-star mental strength grandmasters, the Star Lake Legion's Ace battle groups were led by the Legion's vice commanders. In addition, Ace battle groups only accepted 30 members instead of 50 to consolidate their resources. Meanwhile, the way newcomers could join an Ace battle group was by defeating one of the 3 worst-performing replacement members of an Ace battle group. Of course, the veterans of an Ace battle group would be required to limit their strength so newcomers would more or less have a chance at winning. However, this chance would still have to depend on the strength of the 3 worst-performing participants. If a certain Ace battle group's 3 worst-performing members were too strong, newcomers would have to choose another Ace battle group or a normal battle group. After all, Every participant only had 3 challenge attempts each year. If they failed all 3 of their attempts, they could no longer join a battle group for the rest of the year, and they would lose out on the opportunity to earn a large amount of contribution points from city battles. When Shifeng arrived at the training center's top floor, he came upon a spacious arena that could easily accommodate 100,000 people. Currently, there were a little over 20,000 people crowded in the middle of the arena, and every one of them was a member of the Star Lake Legion. Aside from the 1,000 people who had passed the selection this year, the rest of these Star Lake Legion members were either reserve participants from previous years or former official participants who had been eliminated from their old battle group. Unlike the newcomer participants, these veteran participants carried a hostile gaze that instilled fear into the various newcomers. Moreover, many of these veterans had already reached the 1-star mental strength Grandmaster standard, and their mere presence caused the newcomers around them to feel uncomfortable. Shortly after arriving in the arena, Shifeng successfully grouped up with Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul. At this time, Gentle Snow was dressed in white, while Hidden Soul was dressed in black. However, while Gentle Snow wore a sports outfit that revealed very little skin, Hidden Soul's outfit consisted of a short-sleeved shirt and a pair of short pants. When the two of them stood together, they were like the sun in the darkness. Many participants in the arena couldn't help but be drawn by their beauty and temperament. "Are you all right, Guild Leader?" Gentle Snow worriedly asked when she saw Shifeng's haggard face. "I heard that you and Commander Laura have caused a huge commotion while we were in the trial. Not only did an ancient god appear, but the system has even forced those of us inside the trial space to go offline." Hidden Soul also looked at Shifeng with eyes full of curiosity. Just what kind of battle had taken place on the floating island for the system to forcibly log players out of the game? It should be known that even those challenging the Void Saint Legacy's trial were not spared. "Don't worry, I'm just a little overspent mentally. I'll be fine after a few days of rest." Shifeng waved his hand. "The situation outside has already been dealt with, so just focus on the trial and come out when you're done." While Shifeng and Gentle Snow were talking, several veteran participants nearby could be seen laughing and talking to each other. "This year's number 1 doesn't look like much. Not only is he nearly the same age as me, but he's also only a 2-star mental strength master," a muscular man in his early 30s said as he looked at Shifeng, his voice full of contempt. Despite his age, the muscular man was already a 1-star mental strength grandmaster. How lucky of him to become an official participant with such low standards. "If I had known this year's selection would be so easy, I would have waited 2 more years before trying for the City Legion." Standing next to the muscular man, a young man, who was similarly a 1-star mental strength grandmaster, nodded and laughed, saying, "I know, right? The standard of this year's newcomers is terrible. They get to become official participants without facing any competition. But this is where their luck comes to an end. They'll get to learn how cruel reality is in a moment." The 2 veteran participants' banter irritated many of the newcomer participants nearby. However, there was nothing these newcomers could say to refute these veterans. The gap between mental strength grandmasters and mental strength masters was far too wide. The mental oppression of a 1-star mental strength grandmaster alone was enough to interfere with a 3-star mental strength master's ability to control their body. Fortunately, they would only be competing with each other through virtual battles. The difference in their mental strength would also only reflect in their weapons and equipment. While a 1-star mental strength grandmaster could manifest up to 6 fragmented legendary items and 1 legendary item, which was a lot more than the 4 fragmented legendary items that a 3-star mental strength master could manifest, the difference in equipment standard wasn't overwhelming. It was still possible to make up for this difference using combat standards. Not to mention, not all 1-star mental strength grandmasters could necessarily manifest 6 fragmented legendary items, let alone a legendary item. While the participants in the arena were talking among themselves, a group of people arrived on the arena's 2nd floor. The group was led by a woman with a wild but stunning appearance, and following this woman were about a dozen or so other people. Of the people following the woman, every one of them was a vice commander of the Star Lake Legion and an existence known by all in Star Lake City. "I don't like to spout nonsense. Since everyone is here, let's begin the enrollment tests." the woman in the lead nonchalantly said after stepping onto the podium on the second floor. "Whoever scored first place in the selection, step forward. We'll start with you. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3324, Chapter 398, Starlight's 10 Greats. Chapter 3324, Chapter 398, Starlight's 10 Greats. Chapter 398, Starlight's 10 Greats. Who is this person? Why is she letting a newcomer from the selection start first? Keep your voice down. She's Red Frost, the Star Lake Legion's new commander. What? She's that madwoman? Didn't they say that the madwoman has the body of a bear and a voice that can cause people to go deaf? Initially, many of the participants in the arena were dissatisfied with the words of the woman standing on the second-floor podium. After all, the woman looked roughly the same age as they were, possibly even younger. So, it was only natural they would get upset when the woman talked down to them in such a nonchalant manner. However, after learning from others that the woman was the rumored new commander of the Star Lake Legion, they were promptly stunned. Red Frost was a legend who had emerged from Star Lake City. In the past, even mighty conglomerates had extended invitations to her, offering her the position of elder should she agree to join them. This was because Red Frost used to be one of the Starlight Realm's 10 Greats. Although Red Frost had inexplicably fallen from grace while visiting a sanctuary in God's domain and lost a significant portion of her strength even after getting resurrected, she remained a 3-star mental strength grandmaster in the real world. Or, more specifically, she was someone who had already stepped out of the realm of 3-star mental strength grandmasters. She was still an existence that ordinary corporations feared. "What? Do you people have an opinion?" Red Frost asked as she swept her gaze across the people who had spoken up. "Come up here if you have an opinion. I'll find you a nice, quiet place to chat." "And no. We don't have an opinion." The people who had previously spoken up hurriedly shut their mouths. Red Frost's vengeful personality was known throughout the Starlight Realm. Anyone who dared to offend Red Frost would not have good days ahead of them. Even the guild leaders of upper-ranking hegemonic powers wouldn't dare to offend Red Frost for fear of the trouble she could cause them. "Red Frost." Chiffon grew confused as he looked at the woman on the podium. Although he instantly recognized Red Frost as the staff member responsible for conducting his first selection test in the God's Domain Association, he had never heard of the name Red Frost during his previous life. Yet, going by everyone's expressions and private discussions, it was evident that Red Frost was famous in the greater God's domain. Moreover, she was someone whose mental strength was already very close to reaching the Great Grandmaster standard. "Cowards," Red Frost said as she rolled her eyes at the several people. Then, she returned her focus to the crowd and continued, "I also have one more thing to announce. I will be modifying the enrollment rules for this year. I'm thinking of taking your concern off of the limited number of official participant slots, so for this year, all of you can become official participants so long as you pass the basic test I've set." The crowd in the arena grew restless again when they heard Red Frost's announcement. The biggest hurdle for reserve participants to become official participants was the limited number of available official participant slots. So, having this limitation taken care of was naturally good news for them. "Commander Frost, may we know what your test is?" Once the crowd in the arena was finished processing Red Frost's words, many reserve participants eagerly asked Red Frost for the content of her so-called basic test. "Don't be in such a hurry," Red Frost said, smirking when she saw everyone's eager looks. Then, she pointed at the vice commanders lined up next to her and continued, "So long as you can survive 10 moves from one of them, you will have passed the basic test. If you can survive 20 moves, you'll get to join an ace battle group. However, if you can't survive even 3 moves from one of my vice commanders, come back and try again next year." As soon as Red Frost finished speaking, whether it was the participants gathered in the middle of the arena or the vice commanders standing next to Red Frost, all of them were dumbfounded. "Isn't this too high of a requirement, Commander?" Markless Blade anxiously asked. "Some people here are newcomers who've never even participated in simulation warfare. Moreover, anyone capable of surviving 10 moves against us would already be at the captain level in the Legion. These newcomers can't even survive 3 moves against us, let alone 10. Simulation warfare might be similar to duels occurring in God's domain, but players needed to materialize their own weapons and equipment in simulation warfare, and doing so put a huge strain on one's mind. Even a 4th-floor expert experienced in simulation warfare would have difficulty executing basic combat techniques after materializing their weapons and equipment, let alone a bunch of newcomers. No, I think Commander Frost's idea is good, Brother Markless, a young man with an imposing presence interjected. The previous commander was too lenient on newcomers. If Star Lake City wishes to grow stronger, it will need stronger fighters to represent it in city battles. If that's the case, the number of people who will pass won't even be enough to form a full battle group, Vice Commander Chalene, Markless Blade said as he rolled his eyes at Chen Chalene. He was fully aware that Chen Chalene was looking to target Shifeng, and he did not doubt Chen Chalene would let this perfect opportunity get away. If Shifeng was prevented from passing even the basic test, Chen Chalene would then have a good excuse to sideline Shifeng in the Legion. Alright, let's just begin, Red Frost said, annoyed by Markless Blades and Chen Chalene's bickering. Then, she swept her gaze across her vice commanders and asked, which one of you will go first? Since I support the commander's decision, let me be the first examiner, Chen Chalene said, volunteering himself. Commander. Markless Blade couldn't help but turn to Red Frost. He refused to believe that Red Frost was unaware of Chen Chalene's aim. However, Red Frost did not respond to Markless Blade's gaze. Instead, she narrowed her eyes on Chen Chalene and faintly smiled, saying, Good. You'll be the first examiner, then. Many thanks, Commander. I won't disappoint you. I'll be sure to let these newcomers know your good intentions, Chen Chalene said, grinning. After saying so, Chen Chalene jumped down from the arena's 2nd floor. Even though it was a 7-meter jump, not only did he land steadily on his feet, but he also didn't make any sound when landing. In addition, he started walking as soon as he landed, not needing to stop to stabilize himself at all. The control he had over his physical body had already reached inhuman levels. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3325, Chapter 399, Soul-Stirring / Chapter 3325, Chapter 399, Soul-Stirring / Chapter 399, Soul-Stirring / TL Notes. 1. Changing Newcomer - Rookie 4 Chapters 397 and 398. The reserve participants in the arena were startled when they saw Chen Chalene jumping down from the 2nd floor. What? We're starting with Vice Commander Chalene? If Vice Commander Chalene is going to be the first examiner, who would dare to take the test? I heard that the City Lord had granted Vice Commander Chalene the legendary-ranked Demon God's armor for the upcoming city battle. If he has this Demon God's armor equipped, surviving even 1 move from him would be impossible, let alone 10. The rookie's top ranker sure is unlucky. With this, he will be a benchwarmer for an entire year. When everyone saw Chen Chalene stepping onto the simulation ring and putting on the simulation device, they couldn't help but sympathize with Shifeng. Chen Chalene was a well-known genius in Star Lake City. In terms of combat standards, he was a strong contender for the number 1 spot among the Star Lake Legion's many vice commanders. After combining the piece of legendary equipment Chen Chalene had received from the City Lord, even the Legion's former commander might not be a match for him in simulation warfare. In reality, if not for Red Frost's sudden appearance, Chen Chalene would have been the most likely candidate to succeed the Star Lake Legion's former commander. So, to have someone like Chen Chalene play the examiner role was absurd. Compared to challenging the other vice commanders, anyone who took their basic test from Chen Chalene would have to face significantly greater difficulty. Ha ha ha. The heavens are on my side. Let's see how my big brother will take care of you. Chen Chitien's mood brightened significantly when he saw Shifeng walking into the same simulation ring as his elder brother. Although his elder brother had previously promised him that he would take care of Shifeng, he had more or less given up on this idea after Shifeng secured 1st place in the selection. While his elder brother might be a vice commander of the Star Lake Legion, he still could not afford to create too much trouble for such a talented rookie, especially not when Commander Red Frost and the City Lord were paying attention to Shifeng. At most, his elder brother could create some trouble for Shifeng during city battles or put Shifeng in the position of a replacement member in an ace battle group. However, all that changed with Red Frost's arrangement. Now, Shifeng shouldn't even consider joining an ordinary battle group, let alone an ace battle group. What a pity. Thousand Scars sighed as she looked into the simulation ring. My plan to surpass him during city battles won't be feasible anymore. Thousand Scars was aware of the conflict surrounding Chen Qilin and Shifeng. There was no way Chen Qilin would let go of this opportunity to take revenge for his younger brother. So, he was most definitely going to use 100% of his strength to deal with Shifeng. Players might be limited to the same tier and level in simulation warfare, but they had to use their mental strength to materialize their own weapons and equipment. In other words, the stronger a player's mental strength, the more advantageous of a position they would be in. Not to mention, Chen Qilin was already at the beyond domain realm in terms of combat standards. He was very close to matching pseudo-fifth floor experts. In a situation where he had an advantage in equipment standards, there were zero chances of a titled expert surviving against him. There's nothing to feel pity about, Death Omen disdainfully said. He wouldn't be in this situation if he hadn't provoked Chen Qitian that day. He is foolish to think he can go against a long-standing corporation simply because he has Black Flame backing him. The various corporations have countless geniuses under them. Even if Chen Qilin doesn't deal with him today, there will be other geniuses from other corporations who will make him suffer. Thousand Scars nodded in agreement. At the same time, she celebrated the fact that she had joined the Paimon conglomerate. Otherwise, she would have never been able to turn down the advances of young masters like Chen Qitian lest she wished to offend them. At this time, Chen Qitian and Thousand Scars weren't the only ones paying close attention to Shifeng. The several experts who had entered the greater world with Shifeng similarly scrutinized Chen Qilin and Shifeng. On one side of the simulation ring was Chen Qilin wearing heavy armor and carrying a silver-grey greatsword on his back. Chen Qilin even had a 5-meter-tall body, a clear indicator that he possessed an extraordinary race in God's domain. On the other side was Shifeng wearing jet-black light armor and wielding a charcoal-like long sword. At first glance, Shifeng looked like an impoverished traveler. Although he had a body that was nearly 2 meters tall, he looked no different than an infant compared to Chen Qilin's 5-meter-tall frame. Purple Jade, I heard that you've talked to Vice Commander Fused Blood about inviting Guild Leader Shi to do city missions together, but I don't think he's going to qualify for those missions now, Alice, the Witch of the West, said as she looked at the woman in sportswear standing next to her. Tier 6 players were rare, even in the greater God's domain. Thus, different from Tier 4 and Tier 5 participants, Tier 6 participants were much more valued by the various city legions. As evidence, shortly after they arrived in Star Lake City, the Star Lake Legion's Tier 6 vice commanders had already tried to recruit them into their respective ace battle groups. It was why they never cared about Shifeng securing first place in the selection. Looking at the blonde, doll-like girl standing next to her, Purple Jade anxiously said, Vice Commander Qilin might have extraordinary strength, but Shifeng is no pushover, either. He should have no trouble surviving 10 moves. 10 moves? After looking at Chen Qilin's 5-meter-tall body, Alice shook her head and said, Look at Chen Qilin. He's not even bothering to hide his legendary equipment. A Tier 3 instructor like Shifeng would be fortunate if he could survive even 1 move. While Chen Qilin might have had his tier suppressed to Tier 4 to match Shifeng, his equipment standard was vastly superior to Shifeng's. Not only was Chen Qilin fully clad in fragmented legendary equipment, but he even had the legendary-ranked Demon God's armor. With such equipment standards, he could even fight against Tier 5 experts, let alone a Tier 4 rookie. In the simulation ring. Shifeng, you might have won first place in the selection, but I'm going to show everyone here today that a genius is nothing more than a genius. Don't get too conceited before you become a true powerhouse, Chen Qilin said as he looked at the inconspicuous swordsman before him. Don't worry. I won't make things difficult for you. I'll knock you out in 1 move. After saying so, Chen Qilin grabbed the greatsword on his back and charged at Shifeng. Then, once he was within striking distance, He executed the hurricane/combat technique, sending over 50 sword lights flying at Shifeng. Chen Qilin's attack speed was so overwhelming that it was impossible for the average Tier 4 player to even react to his attacks. One move. After looking at the incoming sword lights, Shifeng casually swung the carbonized longsword in his hand. The next moment, a black light flickered in the ring, which was followed by the sound of metal ringing. Then, a figure could be seen stumbling to the edge of the ring and stopping just in time to avoid instant disqualification. Meanwhile, this figure belonged to none other than the 5-meter-tall Chen Qilin. At this time, though, Chen Qilin's confident expression was nowhere to be seen. Instead, replacing it was a look of confusion. "My dear Vice Commander, don't you think you are thinking too highly of yourself? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3326, Chapter 400 All Our Ants Beneath Tier 6. Chapter 3326, Chapter 400 All Our Ants Beneath Tier 6. Chapter 400 All Our Ants Beneath Tier 6. The arena fell silent when everyone saw Chen Qilin stumbling to the edge of the ring. Vice Commander Qilin lost the exchange? What did that Shifeng guy do? Everyone's eyes bulged as they looked at Shifeng quietly standing in the middle of the ring. Everyone had gotten a clear look at the exchange that had taken place in the ring. 1/. Although they didn't know how many strikes Chen Qilin launched, they were certain that Shifeng had executed only 1/. Moreover, it was a simple slash that did not have any techniques applied to it. It was a common attack that ordinary players would use most often. Is Big Brother deliberately making it easy for him? Chen Qitian wondered to himself as he looked at Chen Qilin in the ring. The only reason he could use to explain what just happened was that Chen Qilin had been holding back his strength. Otherwise, there was no way Shifeng, who wasn't even a mental strength grandmaster, could repulse Chen Qilin, who was equipped with the demon god's armor and a bunch of fragmented legendary items. Not to mention, Shifeng had accomplished this feat using nothing but a normal attack. It should be known that Chen Qilin's equipment allowed his basic attributes to match a well-equipped Tier 5 berserker in basic attributes. It might have been possible for Shifeng to repulse Chen Qilin if he had used an astounding combat technique or heaven-defying skill, but a normal attack? Under normal circumstances, Shifeng would have been sent flying out of the ring the instant their weapons touched. In the simulation ring. After taking a deep breath, Chen Qilin put on a serious expression as he looked at Shifeng and raised his great sword. Unlike the spectators outside the simulation ring, Chen Qilin was aware of what Shifeng had done. Shifeng had accurately read the movement of his arms and took advantage of this knowledge by striking him during one of the brief instances where his arms were relaxed after they had just finished executing a swinging motion. "It seems I've underestimated you, Shifeng. I didn't think you could catch such a small detail. However, I won't let you replicate this miracle a second time." After saying so, Chen Qilin suddenly transformed the greatsword in his hands into a pillar of light and sent it smashing into Shifeng. Mana technique, Dawn Sword. This was an attack without any fancy movements. The only thing this attack had was absolute destructive power. It was an attack that could turn the entire simulation ring into a desolate wasteland. As expected of Vice Commander Qilin. It seems he was indeed trying to let the rookie preserve some of his dignity. I see. I get it now. I was nearly fooled by Vice Commander Qilin's acting skills for a second there. It seems even Vice Commander Qilin doesn't dare to go overboard in his actions. But I guess that makes sense. We are talking about the top ranker of this year's rookies, after all. The commander even appointed him to be the first to take the test. Vice Commander Qilin would make the commander look bad if he eliminated the rookie on the first move. When the peanut gallery saw Chen Qilin using his trademark move, aside from being stunned by Chen Qilin's prowess, they also quickly concluded that Chen Qilin was merely acting when he got sent stumbling to the edge of the ring. After all, Red Frost had taken the initiative to appoint Shifeng as the first examinee for her test. Had Chen Qilin eliminated Shifeng on the first move, it would be no different than slapping Red Frost across the face. However, it'd be a different story if Chen Qilin deliberately lost the first move to Shifeng, offered Shifeng some words of praise, and then eliminated Shifeng on the second move. If that were the case, Shifeng's defeat could be announced to the public as this year's top rookie remains standing even after receiving one move from the Star Lake Legion's vice commander Chen Qilin. Such an achievement could allow Shifeng's fame in Star Lake City to skyrocket. At this time, Thousand Scars and Death Omen also bought into the Peanut Gallery's reasoning, looks of realization appearing on them. It was clear to them that Chen Qilin possessed astonishing strength. He even used to be a strong contender for the position of the Star Lake Legion's commander. So, Thousand Scars and Death Omen were greatly shocked when they saw Shifeng repulsing Chen Qilin. However, after hearing that Chen Qilin was most likely acting, Thousand Scars and Death Omen couldn't help but sigh in relief. The fact that Zero Wing had an expert like Black Flame was already plenty astonishing. If, on top of that, Zero Wing had an acting guild leader who could win against someone of Chen Qilin's caliber, Zero Wing would have no trouble rising in the greater world. When everyone thought the simulation warfare was about to end, Shifeng suddenly split into two copies of himself. One stood in the middle of the ring, while the other stood behind Chen Qilin. If the first time is a miracle, what about the second time? The Shifeng standing behind Chen Qilin asked, revealing a faint smile as he pierced Chen Qilin's heart with his carbonized long sword. An after-image? Chen Qilin's eyes widened in shock when he saw the Shifeng in the middle of the stage gradually fading away. Formless steps. It was one of the most basic footwork in God's domain. Normally, expert players would use this footwork to toy with beginners, and anyone who had reached the domain realm could easily see through it. Yet, he had failed to realize that the person standing in front of him all this time was actually nothing more than an afterimage. Your reaction speed surpasses mine. Are you a monster? Whilst his body was collapsing onto the ring, Chen Qilin turned around to look at Shifeng in confusion. As a beyond domain realm expert, the only way Shifeng could fool him using formless steps was if Shifeng's reaction speed surpassed his. But how could a Tier 4 player possibly have such reaction speed? It seems you're not entirely ignorant, Shifeng said as he sheathed the shadow incinerator. Chen Qilin was indeed strong. Not just in equipment standards but also in combat standards. Shifeng would have been in for a tough fight if it was before obtaining the shadow incinerator. Unfortunately for Chen Qilin, after obtaining the shadow incinerator, Shifeng could push his concentration standard to Tier 6, even without upgrading the Winter of Eternal Night to the legendary rank. Hence, even though his basic attributes in the simulation warfare remained at the Tier 4 standard, his reaction speed had already reached the Tier 5 standard. In addition, Shifeng's powerful concentration allowed him to perceive everything around him perfectly, which naturally included Chen Qilin's movements. So, he took advantage of the instant Chen Qilin had relaxed his mind to quietly appear behind the other party. Of course, while all this seemed miraculous to Chen Qilin, it was a different story for the spectators outside the ring. From the spectators' perspective, they only saw Shifeng executing formless steps to quickly arrive behind Chen Qilin and land a strike. Meanwhile, Chen Qilin stood still like a wooden block throughout this time. This was the might of Tier 6 existences. Unless players reached Tier 6 in their concentration, they couldn't keep anything, not even their mental states, a secret from a Tier 6 existence. Depending on the Tier 6 existence's strength, they might not even need to execute any physical or magical attacks to kill existences beneath Tier 6. Instead, they could simply launch mental attacks, such as Divine Might, to give players below Tier 6 a mental death. Meanwhile, after Chen Qilin collapsed under Shifeng's sword, the whole arena suddenly fell deathly silent as everyone stared at Chen Qilin's corpse in disbelief. Particularly, Chen Qitian, who was about to celebrate his elder brother's victory, had his jaw fall wide open. Chen Qilin lost. The Star Lake Legion's unofficial first vice commander lost. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3327, Chapter 401, Azura. Chapter 3327, Chapter 401, Azura. Chapter 401. Azura, can someone tell me what just happened? Why did Vice Commander Qilin let Shifeng get behind him? Did Vice Commander Qilin just lose on purpose? When the surrounding crowd saw Chen Qilin's 5-meter-tall body collapse, Confusion filled them after a brief silence. Chen Qilin was not just any vice commander in the Star Lake Legion. In the current Star Lake Legion, his strength was second to only Red Frost. Yet, such an expert had lost to a rookie. No matter how everyone thought about it, they felt Chen Qilin must have lost on purpose. Otherwise, why would Chen Qilin stand still like a wooden block? Did Chen Qilin lose his mind? Thousand Scars was flabbergasted when she saw how the battle had ended. He is a vice commander of the Star Lake Legion. He is the face of the entire Legion. Does he even understand what it means for him to lose to a rookie? The Star Lake Legion's vice commanders were right below the commander in strength. If one of these vice commanders were to lose to a rookie, they wouldn't just be ruining their own reputation but the entire Legion's reputation instead. His loss was inevitable, Death Omen said with a grim look, her reaction to Chen Qilin's loss completely different from Thousand Scars' reaction. That guy. Shifeng can no longer be considered human. Chen Qilin's loss was inevitable. Shifeng's not human. Thousand Scars turned to look at Death Omen in surprise and confusion, her mind failing to comprehend the meaning behind Death Omen's words. Thousand Scars admitted that Shifeng was powerful. From his first exchange with Chen Qilin, she could tell that he had most definitely reached the standard of titled experts. However, there were plenty of titled experts in the Star Lake Legion. Or, more specifically, which member of the various ace battle groups wasn't a titled expert? However, to say that a titled expert could overwhelm Chen Qilin to a point where the latter couldn't even react was beyond exaggeration. If we are comparing combat standards, those two are indeed evenly matched, Death Omen said before pausing to take a deep breath. Then, with hints of fear in her eyes, she looked at Shifeng's figure and continued, but Shifeng's concentration has already reached the Tier 6 standard. Players who had never reached Tier 6 would not have noticed why Chen Qilin had lost to Shifeng. However, it was a different story for Death Omen, someone who was formerly a Tier 6 expert and knew the capabilities of a Tier 6 player. His concentration has reached Tier 6. Thousand Scars gasped when she heard Death Omen's words, an expression of disbelief appearing on her face as she turned to look at Shifeng. Although she had never reached Tier 6, she had fought against many of the Flower of Seven Sins Tier 6 experts, so she knew how scary a player could be when their concentration reached the Tier 6 standard. Any player without Tier 6 concentration would be highly susceptible to the mental influence of a player with Tier 6 concentration. With Tier 6 concentration, one could perceive even the subtle details of another person's mental state that the person in question wasn't even aware of. In a one-on-one situation, so long as there wasn't too significant of a gap in basic attributes or combat standards, a player with Tier 6 concentration could trample over a player without Tier 6 concentration. But how could a Tier 4 player have Tier 6 concentration? At this time, Death Omen wasn't the only person who had noticed Shifeng's concentration standard. Every expert who was either at Tier 6 or had reached Tier 6 before was currently staring at Shifeng with widened eyes. Some were puzzled, some were intimidated, and some were pleasantly surprised. Meanwhile, after Markless Blade learned about the situation from his fellow vice commanders, he tentatively looked to the woman leisurely sitting behind him and asked, "Did you find out his concentration has reached Tier 6 beforehand, Commander? Is that why you were confident in letting him fight Chen Qilin?" Markless Blade was aware that Red Frost held a high opinion of Shifeng. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bothered to remember Shifeng's name. However, no matter how high of an opinion Red Frost had of Shifeng, it was still insane to let a rookie fight against Chen Qilin. Unless, of course, Red Frost didn't want Shifeng in the Legion, which definitely wasn't the case. In that case, it could only mean that Red Frost knew for certain Shifeng would do fine even if he went up against Chen Qilin. "No, I didn't know that," Red Frost said, shaking her head. Then, looking at Shifeng with a hint of joy, she licked her lips and continued, "My initial thought was that he would suffer a major setback in Chen Qilin's hands. I wouldn't even be surprised if he failed to last 10 moves. However, I didn't expect him to give me such a huge surprise. Tier 6 concentration. With this, I can give those old bastards over at Jade Light City a piece of my mind." "You didn't know?" Red Frost's words rendered Markless Blade speechless. "Yet, you still let Chen Qilin fight him?" What if Chiffon gets eliminated? Eliminated? Red Frost nonchalantly chuckled. I won't let him get eliminated. If he fails the test, I'll use my commander's privilege to let him join an ace battle group. Your privilege? When Markless Blade heard Red Frost's statement, he couldn't help but ask, you only get one slot every decade. Wouldn't it be a waste to use it on Chiffon? Being the Starlake Legion's commander came with many privileges, and key among them was the privilege to unconditionally let one person under the age of 50 join an ace battle group. Normally, this privilege would be used as a bargaining chip to poach peerless paragons from other cities. And as this privilege was incredibly unfair to the city's countless geniuses and paragons, the Starlake Legion's commander was limited to only one such slot every decade. No, he is worth this slot. Red Frost said definitively. He's worth it. Markless Blade turned to look at Chiffon in confusion when he heard Red Frost's answer. Red Frost's decision might have made sense if she had made it after learning that Chiffon possessed Tier 6 concentration, but before? No matter how Markless Blade thought about it, such a decision would be illogical. After all, their previous impression of Chiffon was that he was only a titled expert, and there were plenty of titled experts in the Starlake Legion. When Red Frost saw Markless Blade's confusion, she chuckled and asked, do you know about the 7 Luminaries Alliance's 7 Luminaries lists? Who doesn't know about the 7 Luminaries lists? Markless Blade responded in a strange tone. All players in the Greater Gods domain pay attention to them. But what do they have to do with Chiffon? The 7 Luminaries Alliance's 7 Luminaries lists were known throughout the Greater Gods domain. There were 3 of these lists, the Luminous Glory list, the Sacred Glory list, and the Divine Glory list. The 3 lists catered to Tier 4, Tier 5, and Tier 6 players respectively, and each recorded 1,000 experts from Greater Gods domain. Any player who could get on one of the 3 lists, whether it was the Luminous Glory list for Tier 4s or the Divine Glory list for Tier 6, would be an individual standing at the apex of the Greater Gods domain. The reason why even conglomerates respected Red Frost was that she used to be on the Divine Glory list in the past. During her prime, her fame in the Starlight Realm was second to none. After all, throughout the Starlight Realm's history, fewer than 10 players from the Starlight Realm had managed to get into the 7 Luminaries lists. Indeed, they wouldn't have 10 players even if they counted all 3 lists. Of course he has something to do with it, Red Frost said, grinning. A change has occurred to the latest Luminous Glory list the 7 Luminaries Alliance has published internally. The 963rd ranker has fallen to 964th place, and the current 963rd ranker is Zero Wings Guild leader, the Azura Sword Emperor Black Flame. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3328, Chapter 402, 7 Luminaries Lists. Chapter 3328, Chapter 402, 7 Luminaries Lists. Chapter 402, 7 Luminaries Lists. TL Notes. Fixed an error in Chapter 400, Formless Steps - Mirage Step. Black Flame. 963rd on the Luminous Glory list. Markless Blade gasped when he heard Red Frost's words. Are you serious, Commander? The 7 Luminaries lists held incredible prestige in the Greater Gods domain. Even if Black Flame was only at the bottom of the Luminous Glory list, getting onto the list in and of itself was already a remarkable feat. The 10 great paragons of a kingdom, the 10 great geniuses of an empire. These people were nothing compared to the people on the 7 Luminaries Alliance's Luminous Glory list. According to rough statistics, there were easily over 1,000 realms in the Greater Gods domain. On the other hand, the Luminous Glory list only recorded 1,000 players. In other words, an entire realm might not even see one of its players being entered into the Luminous Glory list. However, so long as a player managed to get into the Luminous Glory list, it would mean that they already stood at the apex of Tier 4 players in their realm. Of course. This is insider information that I received, Red Frost said definitively. It shouldn't take more than a week before the 7 Luminaries Alliance announces the change to the Luminous Glory list. Ha ha ha. Markless Blade couldn't help but laugh out loud when he heard Red Frost's affirmation. 963rd on the luminous glory list. With this, I can tell others that I once engaged an expert on the luminous glory list in an intense battle. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that none of the Starlight Realms Tier 4 players had ever considered entering the luminous glory list one day. Even the various conglomerates' core paragons would, at most, set the top 10 of the Starlight Realms 100 Nations Paragon battle as their ultimate goal at Tier 4. Originally, Markless Blade still bore some hatred for Black Flame. Now, though, he only felt joy from being defeated by Black Flame. It should be known even the opportunity to spectate an expert on the luminous glory list fight was incredibly rare and valuable. The opportunity was so precious that not even the executives of ordinary corporations could get their hands on a ticket. Only conglomerates could get their hands on a few tickets. Yet, now, it was revealed that he had fought an expert on the luminous glory list. This was an opportunity even conglomerates would have great difficulty acquiring. Can you show some dignity? Red Frost couldn't help but roll her eyes at Markless Blade. Contrasting Red Frost's reaction, the other vice commanders present couldn't help but look at Markless Blade enviously. How lucky can you get, Brother Markless? You actually got to fight such an expert in his early days. Damn. Why didn't I take part in the Ancient River Kingdom's rookie competition? Brother Markless, tell us about Black Flame. How are his combat standards? For a time, the various vice commanders eagerly asked Markless Blade questions, none caring about their dignity or the look of contempt Red Frost was giving them. From their perspectives, experts on the luminous glory list were akin to characters from fairy tales. If they could learn even a little bit of information about these characters, they might receive some inspiration for their own development. While the various vice commanders were busy asking for Black Flame's information, Red Frost walked up to the podium, her reappearance instantly silencing the noisy crowd in the arena. As you've seen, Vice Commander Cheline has been defeated, Red Frost said as she glanced at Chen Cheline, who was in the middle of removing his simulation device. Then, she continued, as I've previously stated, whoever can last 10 moves will pass. But now that Shifeng has defeated Vice Commander Cheline, Shifeng will take Chen Cheline's place as a Vice Commander in the Star Lake Legion from now on. Of course, if any of you can similarly defeat a Vice Commander, you will enjoy the same treatment. As soon as Red Frost finished speaking, the entire arena went into an uproar. What? Is Commander Red Frost for real? Does this mean Vice Commander Cheline didn't get defeated on purpose? This is wonderful. Hurry up and continue with the test. I'm going to challenge those other Vice Commanders. For a time, the people in the arena were filled with surprise and worry. Though, the majority of them couldn't help but be excited by Red Frost's announcement. If it were in the past, they'd have to meet incredibly stringent requirements if they wanted to become a Vice Commander in the Star Lake Legion. Firstly, they needed to reach the 2-star mental strength Grandmaster standard. Secondly, they needed to make sufficient contributions to the Legion. Now, though, all they needed to do was defeat a Vice Commander. The difficulty of becoming a Vice Commander had undoubtedly been reduced significantly, and this gave everyone hope that they, too, could become a Vice Commander. Only, after nearly a day of continuous simulation warfare, those who aspired to become Vice Commanders had fallen into despair. Out of the 10,000 plus people in the arena, nobody other than Shifeng managed to defeat a Vice Commander. In fact, no more than 100 people managed to last 10 moves against the Legion's Vice Commanders. This situation taught everyone that Shifeng's victory wasn't due to luck. It also wasn't because Chen Cheline was weak. Instead, it was because Shifeng was too strong. Aside from Shifeng, the women going by the names of Gentle Snow and Hidden Soul were also ridiculously strong. Both women had lasted over 30 moves against a Vice Commander, their achievements instantly granting them the qualifications to join an ace battle group. Upon seeing the achievements of Shifeng, Gentle Snow, and Hidden Soul, everyone couldn't help but wonder what kind of guild Zero Wing was exactly. Zero Wing only had 3 people partaking in the enrollment test. Yet, out of these 3 people, 2 had become ace battle group members and 1 had become a Vice Commander. The achievements of Zero Wing's members had shattered everyone's understanding of the enrollment test. In addition, one other shocking matter occurred after the enrollment test. More specifically, this matter was related to the various foreign powers which had come to Star Lake City to poach Gentle Snow. Once the enrollment test ended, these powers had seemingly forgotten their original intentions of recruiting Gentle Snow, as none of them attempted to approach her. Instead, the representatives of these powers all approached Shifeng to congratulate him. They also openly expressed that so long as Shifeng was willing to become a vice commander in their respective cities' legion, they could ensure him the position of commander within 3 to 5 years. Since the founding of Star Lake City, this was definitely the first time a rookie from Star Lake City was made such a lucrative offer. However, when these recruiters met with Red Frost's smiling expression, they promptly dispersed and stopped pestering Shifeng. Nighttime, God's Domain Association, Thousand Scars and Death Omen carefully entered a conference room on the 600th floor. When they entered, 2 people were already seated in the room that was the size of a basketball court. Of these 2 people, one was a man, while the other was a woman. Both these people looked young, so young that even Thousand Scars could not help but envy their youth. In reality, these 2 people were already around the age of 26. They were much older than Thousand Scars, who was only 19 this year. However, both of them were 2-star mental strength grandmasters. Moreover, they were already at the limits of the 2-star grandmaster standard and were only half a step away from becoming 3-star mental strength grandmaster. Despite being incredibly talented, even Thousand Scars couldn't help but envy these 2 people. In the greater world, one would be publicly acknowledged as a genius if they became a 1-star mental strength grandmaster before 30. If they could reach this standard before 25, their names could be entered into the history books of Star Lake City, as only a few such people had ever emerged from the city. As for reaching the limits of the 2-star mental strength grandmaster standard around the age of 26, no such existence had ever emerged from Star Lake City. Even if the scope was expanded to cover the several dozen third-tier cities neighboring Star Lake City and the second-tier city governing these third-tier cities, such geniuses were few and far between. An ordinary 2-star grandmaster might look to be on the same level as someone who was at the limits of the 2-star grandmaster standard, but the two were no longer existences on the same level. Most people were under the impression that there was only a simple 1-level gap between 2-star and 3-star mental strength grandmasters. However, for conglomerates and upper-ranking hegemonic powers, they knew that the two were 2 entirely different creatures. Hence, it was incredibly difficult to cross the threshold of 3-star mental strength grandmasters, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the chances of a 2-star grandmaster succeeding were less than 1 in 10,000. Meanwhile, a person who had reached the limits of the 2-star mental strength grandmaster had already taken half a step into the realm of 3-star mental strength grandmasters, and it was only a matter of time before they crossed the threshold completely. Moreover, out of these 2 people, Thousand Scars was incredibly familiar with the woman. This was because she had met this woman in the World Passage, and the woman's name was none other than White Owl. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3329, Chapter 403, A Swordsman Nearing Ancient Gods. Chapter 3329, Chapter 403, A Swordsman Nearing Ancient Gods. Chapter 403, A Swordsman Nearing Ancient Gods. Have a seat. When the young man in the suit and tie saw Thousand Scars and Death Omen entering the conference room, he pointed at the sofa before him and signaled for the two to be at ease. However, be that as it may, neither Thousand Scars nor Death Omen dared to act casually. It was especially so for Thousand Scars. Even as a 3-star mental strength master, she failed to keep her emotions in check and revealed an anxious expression. It had already been over a month since Thousand Scars joined the Paimon conglomerate. She had also joined the conglomerate much sooner than Death Omen, so she knew much more about the conglomerate than Death Omen did. As an outer member who was in the middle of striving to become an internal member in the Paimon conglomerate, the chances of Thousand Scars coming across White Owl, one of the conglomerate's 10 great paragons, were close to 0 under normal circumstances. This was because their paths in life existed in parallel to each other. Take the battle in the World Passage, for example. Despite being an internal reserve member, Thousand Scars didn't even qualify to be part of the army White Owl led. Only internal paragons such as Meteor could qualify. Apart from her status, White Owl's strength was also something Thousand Scars greatly feared. In Thousand Scars' opinion, Meteor was already an incredible expert, and it would take her quite some time before she could hope to match him. However, in front of White Owl, the so-called incredible expert Meteor would probably last no more than one move. After all, White Owl was an expert who was only half a step from crossing the threshold of the World Tower's 5th floor, reaching the legendary 5th floor standard. However, compared to White Owl, the smartly dressed young man was even more terrifying of an existence. The Paimon conglomerate's third paragon, Nameless Blade. Moreover, the Nameless Blade wasn't just the Paimon conglomerate's third paragon. At the same time, he was also the conglomerate's second successor. Indeed, Nameless Blade was one of the Paimon conglomerate's successors. The likes of Dira weren't even worthy of carrying Nameless Blade's shoes, and even the Paimon conglomerate's 3 overlords needed to treat Nameless Blade with respect. Even if Nameless Blade failed to become the Paimon conglomerate's helmsman in the future, he could still become a senior vice president of the Paimon conglomerate and govern the many upper-ranking hegemonic powers subordinated to the conglomerate. Compared to the 3 overlords, who only got to manage one Tier 6 trump card legion each, his status would be much higher in the conglomerate at that time. So, it was only natural for Thousand Scars to grow anxious after suddenly coming face to face with such a big shot. If she accidentally offended Nameless Blade, she could very well be banished from the various moving cities and forced to live in hardship for the rest of her life. No need to be nervous. Just think of me as your colleague, Nameless Blade said with a helpless smile when he saw neither Thousand Scars nor Death Omen daring to sit down. If you two don't take a seat, our conversation can't go anywhere. Just sit. Mr. Blade is different from Dira, White Owl said. In fact, you'll only make Mr. Blade uncomfortable if you think of him the same as Dira. Hearing this, Thousand Scars and Death Omen nodded and stopped being polite. I heard that both of you are acquainted with Black Flame. While pouring the 2 tea, Nameless Blade smiled and curiously asked, "May I know if you have any detailed information on him?" Thousand Scars and Death Omen exchanged looks with each other. I know more about Black Flame, so I'll speak, Death Omen said. Although she was curious as to why Nameless Blade would be interested in Black Flame, she chose to say everything she knew, starting from how she learned of Black Flame to how he subsequently stirred up a storm in the miniature ancient world. I see. Nameless Blade fell into a long silence once he finished hearing Death Omen's story. It seems our conjecture was correct. You don't know about Black Flame's true identity, either. We are not Zero Wings members, after all. We can't probe deeper into his identity even if we wanted to, Death Omen explained. If anyone would know about Black Flame's true identity, it would most likely have to be my cousin and Zero Wings core executives. Your cousin? Curiously, Nameless Blade asked, "May I know who your cousin is?" Hidden Soul. Death Omen said venomously. She used to be the one who took away my position as a commander in the Flower of 7 Sins, but now she is very close to Zero Wing. She also has a close relationship with Black Flame, as Black Flame did not hesitate to start a war with the Flower of 7 Sins for her sake. This is good news. Nameless Blade suddenly smiled. Good news. Death Omen looked at Nameless Blade in puzzlement, her mind failing to understand how this was supposed to be good news. I hope you two can join Zero Wing, Nameless Blade said, getting straight to the point. With your blood relationship with your cousin, it should be relatively easy for you to join the ranks of Zero Wing's core executives. This, Death Omen couldn't help but doubt her hearing when she heard Nameless Blade's request. It should be known that Black Flame was the villain who had not only annihilated an army of several 100,000 strong belonging to the Paimon conglomerate, but had also caused Dira to nearly suffer soul annihilation. At this point, the Paimon conglomerate should want nothing more than to erase Black Flame's existence. Yet, now, Nameless Blade wanted her to let go of her past grievances to join Zero Wing, the guild led by Black Flame? This was utterly insane. This is an order, Nameless Blade strictly said, instantly changing his request into an order when he saw Death Omen's reaction. Also, you two won't be the only ones joining Zero Wing. Once you're in, I'll also need you to introduce us to Zero Wing. You are also joining Zero Wing, Mr. Blade? Thousand Scars felt that she had experienced an auditory hallucination. She could understand Nameless Blade having them join Zero Wing. After all, it was common for the various powers to use their base-level members to conduct espionage on other powers. However, it was a different story for Nameless Blade. The Paimon conglomerate's second successor enjoyed status few people could match or overtake in the Starlight Realm. Yet, now, this second successor was humbling himself to join Zero Wing for the sake of a player named Black Flame. If these words didn't come directly from Nameless Blade's mouth, Thousand Scars would have never believed them. It should be known that the current Zero Wing wasn't even a hegemonic power in the Starlight Realm. What qualifications did Zero Wing have to get a peerless paragon from the Paimon conglomerate to join it? Definitely. This is also my goal in coming to Star Lake City, Nameless Blade said. Then, revealing a wry smile, he continued, "You have no idea how big of a price I had to pay to snatch this opportunity." "You had to pay a price to come here?" Death Omen was astonished. Logically, there should be nothing outside the reach of a successor of the Paimon conglomerate. Yet, Nameless Blade was saying that he had to make significant sacrifices to come to a backwater city like Star Lake City. For a moment, Death Omen couldn't help but doubt her worldview. White Owl remained quiet when she saw Death Omen's response. The matter regarding Black Flame currently remained top secret even within the Paimon conglomerate, so she didn't have the authority to reveal information on the matter. That was something up to Nameless Blade to decide. "I guess it'll be alright to tell you too now since this matter won't be a secret in the future," Nameless Blade said, sighing. Then, he retrieved a document from his briefcase and put it on the table, saying, "Take a look at it yourselves. However, remember never to share what you see with anyone else. Otherwise, the consequences will be beyond your ability to bear." Hearing Nameless Blade's words, Death Omen and Thousand Scars couldn't help but hesitate as they looked at the document on the table. If they looked at the document, they would most definitely be burdened with a heavy responsibility that came with severe consequences. Yet, they would be plagued by curiosity if they chose not to read the document. They also felt they would be letting something important pass by them. Let's take a risk. Ultimately, Death Omen and Thousand Scars decided to see what secrets Zero Wing held that would necessitate a big shot like Nameless Blade to make a personal visit to Star Lake City. Around a dozen minutes later, Death Omen and Thousand Scars became completely silent. "That person is actually a swordsman nearing ancient gods. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3330, Chapter 404, New List. Chapter 3330, Chapter 404, New List. Chapter 404, New List. Silver Frost City, Green God Corporation's branch headquarters. Next to the bustling street, a group of young male and female teenagers were gathered outside the Green God Corporation's entrance. "Amazing. So, this is the greater world. Isn't this a little too insane? Mental strength masters that are incredibly rare in our world are everywhere here. I know, right? Even in the upper zone I stayed in, mental strength masters were regarded as extraordinary individuals. But here, any random 16-year-old could be a mental strength master. This is simply absurd." The group of teenagers looked at their surroundings in curiosity. Their gazes were filled with awe even when they looked at the pedestrians walking on the sidewalk. These teenagers were geniuses selected by the Green God Corporation from their homeworld to enter the greater world. They were brimming with confidence when they were initially chosen. However, after arriving in the greater world, their confidence instantly plummeted as they realized that their talent in mental strength was nothing compared to the greater world's inhabitants. Meanwhile, in response to the teenagers' awestruck behavior, the pedestrians only glanced at them before going on their way. The teenagers' behavior had long become a common sight to them. It was common for corporations in the greater world to select a group of talented young people from their respective homeworlds and bring these talents to the greater world for training. It was so that these corporations could get more people into City Legions. Now that the selection for Silver Frost City's City Legion this year had already ended, the various corporations and powerful families would naturally start preparing for next year's selection. While the teenagers outside the Green God Corporation were waiting to enter the building, a woman in office wear walked past them and into the building. Upon seeing the beautiful woman in her mid-20s, whether the security guards by the entrance or the middle-aged man leading the group of talented teenagers, all of them wore respectful looks as they watched her walk by. "Who is this person, instructor? She doesn't look much older than us," a young man whose mental strength had reached the one-star master standard asked the middle-aged man leading their group, unable to contain his surprise when he saw the middle-aged man's reaction. It should be known that the chief instructor leading them was a big shot in the upper zones. At the same time, he was a bona fide one-star mental strength grandmaster. So, the young man found it unbelievable that the chief instructor was behaving respectfully to someone who was not only younger but also wasn't even a mental strength grandmaster. Keep your voice down. She is Lu Wen, Vice President Xia's secretary. She is also your senior, the middle-aged man said as he glared at the youth. 2 years ago, she was similarly selected by the corporation to enter the greater world like you all. Currently, she is already a group leader in the Silver Frost Legion. If any of you can get into the Silver Frost Legion next year, you might even be able to join her battle group. The youths' mouths widened when they heard their chief instructor's words, their eyes filled with yearning and anticipation as they watched Lu Wen disappear into the building. A group leader in the Silver Frost Legion, is it? I'm definitely getting into the Silver Frost Legion next year. The greater world's wonders had already let them realize how small and frail their homeworld was. Whether it was the average lifespan or technological standards in the greater world, both were vastly superior to what was available in their homeworld. Moreover, it was only a matter of time before everyone from their homeworld would need to migrate to the greater world. At that time, the vast majority of people could only live in the greater world's towns, and only a very small minority would get to live in the greater world's cities to enjoy a long life and youth. If they wanted to be able to remain in the greater world's cities, their only options were to either become a mental strength grandmaster or a participant of a city legion. At that time, not only could they continue staying in a city, but they could also receive the Green God Corporation's focus, becoming an existence even superpowers feared and respected. Green God Corporation's top-floor office. When Lu Wen entered the office, she saw Xia Qingying in the middle of processing various documents and a woman quietly seated next to Xia Qingying. The woman seated next to Xia Qingying had her face hidden by an electronic barrier. Even though Lu Wen couldn't see the woman's face, she felt an instinctive fear when she stood in the other party's presence, even more so than when she stood facing a 3-star mental strength grandmaster. However, Lu Wen didn't place too much attention to the woman. Instead, she walked up to Xia Qingying's desk and dejectedly reported, "Vice President Xia, the selection in Silver Frost City went just as we expected. Only Jun Luosha was successful, while the others were eliminated." After a slight pause, Lu Wen indignantly continued, "The board of directors is simply abominable. Even though Silver Frost City is also a second-tier city, the resources they allocated to us for this year are only half of what they allocated to Wu Yao's side. With this, we're going to have an even more difficult time nurturing our newcomers." Hearing her trusted aide's complaint, Xia Qingying put down the document in her hand and chuckled, saying, "It can't be helped. Now that the Zero Wing I've supported has offended the Paimon conglomerate, those old fellows will naturally support Wu Yao's side." "How are you still in the mood to joke around, Vice President Xia? If we can't earn enough contributions for the corporation in Silver Frost City this year, our branch will be disqualified from the city," Lu Wen anxiously said. It wasn't easy for a corporation to establish itself in the greater world cities. It was especially so for cities in the second tier and above. A corporation would have to outcompete many other corporations before being qualified to establish a branch headquarters in a second-tier city and be given the right to send newcomers into the city for training over the long term. Moreover, even after securing a slot in a second-tier city, a corporation still had to fight to retain this slot every year. If a corporation were to lose its slot, it would face significantly greater difficulty in recovering this slot in the future. Although the number of third-tier cities in the greater world was dozens of times greater than that of second-tier cities, the resources available in second-tier cities were vastly superior. Take the precious stardew, for example. While it was an incomparably precious commodity that was only made available to City Legion members in third-tier cities, it could occasionally be seen appearing in auctions hosted in second-tier cities. Not to mention, second-tier cities had a far bigger and superior talent pool than third-tier cities, and having access to such a talent pool was incredibly beneficial to corporations. If the branch headed by Xia Qingying were to lose its place in Silver Frost City this year, the difficulty of acquiring city contribution points for the branch would double in the coming year. I know that, Xia Qingying said, chuckling. Then, she handed an electronic document to Lu Wen and continued, those old fellows might think I have lost big this time, but whether I will actually lose to Wu Yaro remains to be seen. This is the 7 luminaries lists. Lu Wen was a little puzzled by the electronic document. The 7 luminaries lists were known throughout the greater world, and they were a topic that people loved to talk about every day. However, the 7 luminaries lists had nothing to do with the various corporations. After all, the existences on those lists were akin to myths, and they stood far out of the reach of measly corporations. This is the latest edition published this morning, Xia Qingying explained with a smile. You'll know what I'm talking about once you look through the Luminous Glory list. After Xia Qingying finished speaking, Lu Wen quickly browsed through the Luminous Glory list. The Luminous Glory list recorded 1,000 players. It was by no means many, but if one carefully read through every bit of information provided by the list, it would take over a day of reading to look through everything. After all, the list contained detailed records of the 1,000 recorded players. Some entries even had battle videos attached. So, to avoid wasting time, Lu Wen only looked at the names on the list. This is Azura Sword Emperor, Black Flame. When Lu Wen saw the new name that had taken the 963rd rank on the Luminous Glory list, she couldn't help but rub her eyes, thinking she was hallucinating. TL notes: 1. Changing Jiang Yaro, in Chapter 276 to Wu Yaro. I think the author misremembered Jiang Yaro's name and started to assume it as Wu Yaro, so I'm just going to switch to Wu Yao. Phi. Jiang Yaro Wu Yaro is another vice president of the Green God Corporation. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3331, Chapter 405 Eternal Chamber of Commerce. Chapter 3331, Chapter 405 Eternal Chamber of Commerce. Chapter 405 Eternal Chamber of Commerce. This can't be real, right, Vice President Xia? Lu Wen asked as she looked at Xia Qingying in disbelief. This is the Luminous Glory list we are talking about. Black Flame has only repelled 2 of the Paimon conglomerate's core paragons. How can he qualify for the list? The Luminous Glory list might be the least significant list out of the 7 luminaries lists, but it remained an unreachable goal for most, if not all, paragons in the Starlight Realm. This was because those capable of entering the Luminous Glory list were all experts who had reached the 5th floor standard at a young age. After all, the Luminous Glory list only recorded geniuses under the age of 35. It was true that the Paimon conglomerate Storm and Saint Arm were rare paragons in the Starlight Realm. However, defeating the 2 of them was not enough to prove that Black Flame had reached the 5th floor standard already. I don't know how the 7 Luminaries Alliance came to this conclusion, either, but since the Alliance has decided on this placing, it should have some information that we aren't privy to. After all, the 7 Luminaries Alliance has never been wrong. The Alliance will never add someone to the Luminous Glory list without verified information, Xia Qingying said. Then, wearing a faint smile, she continued, although I've long since known that Black Flame could make significant achievements in the Greater God's domain, I didn't think he would bring me such a huge surprise so soon. Those old fellows are probably panicking right about now. Panic? They're probably dying from regret right about now. This is a Luminous Glory expert we are talking about, Lu Wen said ecstatically. So long as a Luminous Glory expert reaches Tier 6, they'll instantly rise to become one of the top 10 experts of their realm. Tier 4 experts might be insignificant in the Greater God's domain, but it was a completely different story for Tier 4 experts on the Luminous Glory list. Such experts could no longer be regarded as budding geniuses. Instead, they were already bona fide powerhouses. So long as a Luminous Glory expert reached Tier 6, even conglomerates would fear them. At this time, the masked woman sitting next to Xia Qingying suddenly asked, "Are you certain about this, Qingying?" The masked woman's voice was void of emotions. Even hearing about the luminous glory list, something that would normally excite everyone in the Starlight Realm, the woman's voice did not show the slightest bit of emotional fluctuations. "I've made up my mind." In a firm tone, Xia Qingying said, "I am going to use my reinforcement privilege." "All right, but don't regret it," the masked woman said. "He is but an existence at the bottom of the luminous glory list. I hate to break it to you, but it is unlikely you can become one of our members by relying on him. If you fail, we will take back the token she gave you, and you will lose your eligibility to join us." After saying so, the masked woman left the office without another word. "Vice President Xia, this is the only opportunity she has left us with." After seeing the masked woman leave, Lu Wen quietly asked, "Are you really going to gamble it on Black Flame?" The masked woman was a representative of the Eternal Chamber of Commerce, an apex power standing at the pinnacle of the greater god's domain. Out of all the powers in the Starlight Realm, only the Galaxy Conglomerate had some dealings with the Eternal Chamber of Commerce. The other powers in the Starlight Realm weren't even qualified to get acquainted with the Eternal Chamber of Commerce. "I don't have a better choice." Revealing a wry smile, Xia Qingying said, "The token she gave us has a time limit. Moreover, she isn't a core executive of the Eternal Chamber of Commerce, so I am already fortunate I can have a reserve membership slot." The Eternal Chamber of Commerce only released 100 reserve membership slots across the greater world each year, and many conglomerates couldn't even get their hands on one. So, she was already incredibly fortunate to have received one of these slots, which gave her the qualifications to fight for official membership. Inside a luxurious suite on the God's Domain Association's 600th floor. Stepping out of the meditation room, Shifeng couldn't help but let out a rueful sigh as he looked out the window at the unobstructed night view of Star Lake City. The God's Domain Association's 600th floor was a place off-limits to non-VIP guests. Meanwhile, even conglomerates would have to go to great lengths to obtain VIP status in the God's Domain Association. However, in Star Lake City, so long as one became a vice commander of the Star Lake Legion, one could stay on the 600th floor for up to 7 days for free every month. 7 days might not seem like a long time, but it was enough to provide extraordinary benefits to those below the 3-star mental strength Grandmaster standard. Not only could the God's Domain Association's meditation rooms help users recover from mental fatigue rapidly, but they could also accelerate the development of users' mental strength by a large margin. These meditation rooms were also why most of the Star Lake Legion's vice commanders could reach the 2-star mental strength Grandmaster standard. "It's a pity I can only stay here for 7 days a month. If I could stay here for a full month, even reaching the mental strength Grandmaster realm wouldn't be out of the question," Shifeng thought as he felt his body's energized state. "Going by the Star Lake Legion's rules, once I use up my allotted 7 days, I will have to pay 10,000 star coins and 10,000 city contributions every day if I want to continue staying here. If I want to stay the full month, I will need 230,000 star coins and 230,000 city contributions." The threshold to becoming a mental strength Grandmaster was incredibly difficult to reach. Even inhabitants born in the greater world would have difficulty reaching it, with the chances of a person becoming a mental strength Grandmaster being less than 1%. However, so long as a person became a mental strength Grandmaster, not only would their status and identity undergo significant changes in the greater world, but their control over their mind would also undergo a qualitative transformation. For Shifeng, this qualitative transformation would be of significant help to him in lifting the seals on the Shadow Incinerator. If he could remove even one seal from the Shadow Incinerator, further increasing the weapon's strength, he would be confident in escaping with his life even if he came across the Paimon Conglomerate's Tier 6 army without having to resort to using the Shadow Incinerator's double-edged skills. Unfortunately, earning city contributions wasn't an easy task, even for a vice commander of the Star Lake Legion. If he wanted to earn tens of thousands of city contribution quickly, he'd have to do so through city battles. Meanwhile, the prerequisite for participating in city battles was to have a battle group. "Commander Red Frost has really given me a difficult problem," Shifeng thought. Originally, Shifeng's plan was to join a random battle group to earn city contributions while slowly solidifying Zero Wing's foothold in Star Lake City. However, because of Red Frost's arrangement, he became a vice commander all of a sudden. While this position afforded him much more freedom and benefits than the average official participant, it also came with many problems. Firstly, Shifeng needed to form his own battle group. As a newcomer in the greater world, this was not an easy task for him. After all, the various battle groups in the Starlake Legion were backed by either a corporation or an in-game power. This allowed these battle groups to have a reliable supply of weapons, equipment, and even resources for developing mental strength. In contrast, Shifeng had nothing to offer to those in his battle group. And if he couldn't offer anything, there was no way any expert would be willing to join his battle group. Whatever. There's no use thinking about these things. I'll just post a recruitment notice at the training center tomorrow and try to recruit as many people as I can, Shifeng thought with a wry smile. After verifying that God's Domain system update was completed, Shifeng laid into his new virtual gaming cabin and logged back into God's Domain. Shortly after Shifeng logged into God's Domain, the latest issue of the 7 Luminaries lists also started being sold across Starlake City. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.